In 2015, on New Year's Eve, I was settled on board a River Sea-type steamer, with a name, the mention of which will always evoke the darkest associations in me. The very next day, upon arrival, I, overwhelmed with excitement and uncertainty about my abilities, began the immediate duties of a deckhand. It was my first flight and subsequently my last. Never before had I had anything to do with the sea element, but the very mention of the profession of a sailor could only cause laughter and assurances that I would not leave my family for 6 months for anything in the world, and even more so, I would not scrub the deck and beat off rust to the screams of a subdued bosun at the other end light. I will not describe the reasons that made me change my mind abruptly on this score, but in short I can only say that such a decision was made of my own free will and not out of curiosity before the adventurous life of a sea wolf. Such a stereotype has never been of any interest to me at all. Therefore, during all the days I spent at sea, I absolutely did not share those lively moods inherent in typical representatives of this profession. I was constantly haunted by homesickness and, despite the constant presence of my colleagues and the saturation of my working days, the feeling of loneliness tormented me terribly from day to day. Life for me here flowed very monotonously and gray, until one day it fell to my lot to witness the most nightmarish events, which I still remember without hunting and with a shudder in my heart. The time of my watch was unchanged throughout the contract, from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and in the evening from 16:00 to 20:00. On February 24th, our ship entered the Turkish port of Samsun to unload coal. I took over the watch at the gangway in the evening, as usual, 10 minutes before my scheduled time. The sailor, who had lighted his watch, was overjoyed at my premature appearance, and with my consent retired to the long-awaited rest. When I was alone with myself, I used to look into the murky lilac distances, where the sea line on the horizon blurred when it came into contact with the blackness of the night sky. I wrapped myself in my pea jacket and listened to the measured surf of the Marmara Sea on the side of the steamer. The sun has already disappeared from sight in the blurred fading colors of sunset. As soon as the shadows cast by the superstructure and the horn pile of lightning rods in the mainmast disappeared into the thickening twilight, I, according to the instructions of the watchman, went to the forecastle to turn on the lighting on the foremast and at the same time check the mooring ends. On the port side, edged with yellow lanterns, huge shafts of coal masses formed an impressive landscape, resembling mountain ranges stretching from the tip of the pier, where it's blunt, surrounded by fenders, the end breaks off into the sea, into a smoky unsteady space, going deep into the territory of the port. Having passed the port side, I climbed the unpainted ladder to the forecastle deck for a long time, clicked the switch on the mast and began kicking the thick nylon ends, thus determining how tightly they stretched to the bollards on the pier. As a rule, I returned back to the post on the other side, i.e., if I came to one end on the left. Therefore, I was already heading back to the right and vice versa. Over the time of my stay on the steamer, I have developed a number of similar oddities. I believe the reason for its appearance lies in the faded and boring monotony of the unchanging routine of the primitive, but not easy work of an ordinary sailor. Although this vision is exclusively mine, many sailors would clench their fists from such a characteristic of their difficult craft, in which, as I know, in addition to work, they manage to find a lot of amusements and even addictions. Going down the ladder, already on the starboard side, I lit a cigarette and, without hurrying, walked along the inclined deck, immersed in darkness. The light of the superstructure lanterns and the forecastle did not reach here. The angular bulk of the holds towering above me made the narrow lowland of the starboard side inaccessible to getting here, and a small fraction of the bright pale light pouring from LED spotlights on the hatch covers and the deck in front of the superstructure. I should not have left the post at the ramp unattended for a long time, but the picture emerging against the background of the distant, weaving together the sea and the starless sky, shrouded in patchy clouds, canvases, took very strange and frightening outlines with amazing speed. I was unable to take my eyes off and was simply dumbfounded, vainly guessing what kind of colossal natural phenomenon, the nature of which was hidden from my understanding, was raging over the surface of the open sea. The distant night fog from the western side, where the sun had recently sunk below the horizon, thickened with the darkest tones and shimmered with flashes of lightning. The sea, which had been in a state of complete calm a minute ago, was noticeably agitated. The growing waves rolling under the side of the steamer, on their crests carried loud echoes of distant thunder. I was seized by a long-forgotten feeling. It seemed to come to life after many years of sleep in the depths of my consciousness, which had become coarsened with age, anxiety, and not just anxiety, but precisely the same, lost in the years of growing up, childish, exciting the imagination. I find it difficult to describe what I saw that night, because the scale of what was happening was universal, and either the grotesque forms that appeared were materializing phantoms, which at one moment took on vague and barely discernible outlines in the darkening haze, and the next disappeared behind a cluster of thunderclouds, or I from time to time, under the influence of the terrifying spectacle of the raging, impending from the womb of the night haze of the elements, fell into a wild confusion of reason. I do not undertake to assert. One thing I can say with a certain clarity, something that appeared against the background of the shuddering sky was hobbling on two legs, dispersing the cloud masses with its cosmically heavy bulk, twisting their viscous changeable forms into devilishly beautiful whirlwinds, turning purple in the reflections of raging lightning. A monstrous mirage or the play of the elemental forces of nature, whatever it was the most shocking performance that I have ever seen in my lifetime. Panic had not yet reached my shaken mind, but the wave of indescribable horror that swept over me crippled my legs and deprived me of the ability to move. I fell to my knees, pressing myself into the bulwarks and, absorbed in the terrible sight, I fully felt my own helplessness in the face of such a powerful phenomenon. I say phenomena, not beings, only because of the persistent assurances from common sense, which he still clung to for some time, despite the wild mind-blowing guesses that were already inexorably creeping into him by that time, accompanied by endless flashes of lightning, unknown to anyone in this world, except for rare madmen who dared to come into contact with the forbidden secrets of another, demonic world. An uninvited guest from some alien regions of the universe was prohibitively large and carried with it, without any doubt, catastrophic consequences for our planet. The phenomenon of such a creature cannot fail to result in cataclysms. From what abyss only this something, whose dimensions are ridiculous to call gigantic, escaped. They went beyond all the mythical canons known to mankind. I thank God that he mercifully hid the monster's head in the impenetrable darkness of the night, and the cloud shroud constantly tightening around the monster's figure did not allow me to completely lose my mind. The creature, undoubtedly surpassing in height any mountain peak that the earth has ever known, would slow, by the standards of such a negligibly small creature as man, with the movements of its immense columnar limbs, cut the sea, raising huge waves. Fortunately, we haven't had time to unload the holds yet, otherwise we would have been shaken up by the masses of incoming waves, and the steamer would inevitably have crushed the port side against the reinforced concrete structure of the pier. The rumble of distant thunderclaps spread over the restless surface of the sea, but at times it seemed to me that amid the rumble of the raging cavalcade of a raging thunderstorm, a long, abrupt roar or rather a squawk was heard. Such a sound seemed familiar to me, but I could not connect it with any of the representatives of our terrestrial fauna known to me. Then I smelled a disgusting smell. The stench carried by the wind from the sea was unbearable and made me sick. It stank of an unbearable mixture of sulfur and rotting algae. Usually such smells are caught on the beaches on hot summer days. The difference, however, was the degree of saturation. The stench was truly murderous. Still being enthralled to the fear that bound me, I could not find the strength to shake off its chilling numbness and did not dare to show my heads over the bulwark. I could not get rid of the crazy thought that that devilish fiend, piercing the vast heights of heaven with its barrel-shaped body, could be watching me from its cloudless distances. The surveyed panorama of the raging infernal forces presented itself to my feverish attention through the oblong oval hole of the clue. I have no idea how long I sat like this, aiming my gaze at the nightmare bubbling for miles to the east, protruding from the shaky haze with grotesque forms of a heavily plodding monster. Its legs, like two cyclopean columns, pushed the water masses in front of it. The demon retreated into the depths of the stormy night. The clouds enveloping his fuzzy figure, shimmering in the fiery haze of lightning discharges, to be more precise, only fragments of it, since most of the monstrous body was hiding in the inaccessible heights of the sky, remaining behind, tightened and formed a kind of phantasmagoric furrowed veil, which in the next moment spun into one giant funnel and began to drill the surface of the sea, all growing and turning into a real tornado. The monster was moving away, gradually getting lost in the darkness of the blackening distance. Then a terrible thunder burst, even the hull of the steamer visibly shuddered, and the windows of the portholes rattled. In an instant, a torrential rain of unprecedented force poured down, as if the outraged heavens had opened in an intention to hide something unnatural and blasphemous in relation to the nature of this planet, something whose abominable appearance offended the natural course of things and was the result of a mistake by the forces of the highest order of the universe. Having come out of my ridiculous shelter and finally freed myself from the influence of the nightmare that had befallen me, I returned to the post at the ramp and sat down on one of the barrels. From some dark depths of my clouded mind, creepy ugly faces began to appear, frightening prophecies. They whispered to me about the inevitability of the approaching end of the world, and I had no choice but to tremulously listen to their bubbling demonic voices, driving me to extreme frenzy, languishing in anticipation of when my consciousness would finally be overwhelmed by a wave of saving fainting, in the emptiness of which these painful thoughts and all those grotesque devilish images would sink in the outlines that have been etched into my memory with such force. The state in which my replacement found me caused him only ridicule. I decided for myself to keep the tormenting evidence to myself. Without saying a word, I walked silently and abstractedly to my cabin and, locking myself in, lay down on the creaking bed. Blissful, intoxicating oblivion engulfed my mind. In the morning, when I found myself among the usual working environment, among cheerful, carefree sailors who nourished their modest hopes, I realized that I was the only one to whom a terrible secret had been revealed. And even the fact of the discovery of the dead body of the guard at dawn between the mounds of coal, who, according to the port agent, according to preliminary data, died of a heart attack, could not overshadow the cheerful mood prevailing in the crew. On one of the days following the nightmare I experienced, while on watch on the bridge, discouraging news accidentally reached my attention, which sounded in one of the captain's idle conversations with the second mate, 40 nautical miles from the coastline of the city of Samsun, in the port of which our ship was waiting for unloading. 2 Turkish steamers landed at once in the very mouth of a sudden storm. After several strange, horror-filled replicas thrown into the ether, both vessels disappeared without a trace from the radar of the Coastal Service. The words sounded on a frequency common to most of the merchant ships arriving at the port, as well as those leaving it, were pretty striking in their content. The authorized persons who were entrusted with the responsibility for investigating the tragic incident that took place in the open waters of the Marmara Sea on February 24, 2016, after listening to recordings of radio conversations with the crews of the missing ships, were left in deep perplexity. Both captains, desperately shouting over each other, repeated the same superstitious word, Marduk, Marduk, Marduk.